all settled? Shivani, just keep doing musical chairs. Just keep doing musical chairs. We need more space for these guys. Students of architecture here to present how they understand architecture and temporal spaces, or architecture and time. So I guess we'll begin with our presentations. That itself will speak about the various interpretations. We begin with Anuj Daga, who's graduated from the Academy of Architecture and is a recipient of the National Award awarded by the Council of Architecture and the Charles Fourier Gold Medal for his undergraduate thesis, Cinema for the Blind. He's been teaching in the Academy of Architecture in Kamla Raheja since he's graduated. And he's also done his fellowship from Kamla Raheja in 2009, where he studied the manifestations of domesticity in Indian homes. He was a part of Max Muller Bhavan research project, Cultural Spaces in India, and now currently he's a full-time faculty at Academy of Architecture along with architectural practice. So, Anuj.
Thank you. Can we... Okay, Manisha, I'll just kind of... as you identify the projects, you can just keep on scrolling them.
Okay.
Okay. Since Nisha has asked me to present first, I'll just quickly kind of brief all of you on what are the different ways in which we interpret time in architecture, and what are the different ways in which we read time in architecture. So, one of the first kind of ways in which I'll begin to introduce time in architecture is the whole idea of measuring time, and that we can see through one of the oldest kind of architectural monuments or architectural wonders of the world, that is Stonehenge. And on the other examples, we have things like large sundials or astronomical observatories which try to kind of grasp this idea of measuring time, and all these are aligned to astronomical kind of constellations and stars, and they ultimately become spatial products on within our space. And can you scroll? So yeah, I mean a lot of analysis of all these spaces tell us that they are kind of aligned to various cosmic bodies, and but ultimately they become very different kind of spatial experiences in our space. Can we go ahead? Yeah, so we all know this is Jantar Mantar in Delhi, and again we see that the whole idea of measuring time ultimately results into these very curved kind of forms, which almost can resemble the shape of the earth, or the way in which planets move. Can we go next? Yeah, so more such examples of Jantar Mantar in Jaipur, and I'll just quickly roll on to the next way in which we interpret time, that is through heritage and monumentality. Can we go next? I just missed out the clock towers, which ultimately kind of made time into numbers, and but the clock towers itself became very machiney kind of spaces to go inside and inhabit. The next idea I'll talk about is heritage and monumentality, where the whole idea of going back in time, connecting to your roots, cultural identity. And this is again an exercise in time where you are trying to reinforce this idea of timelessness also in some way. We all know the Taj Mahal, which was erected to eternalize a specific event in time. Also memorials to immortalize people in time. We know, and there are these countless examples about monumentality. On the other hand, where where you freeze a certain kind of event in time is the idea of temporality, where the idea is about changing spaces or the changing nature of activity and space and time. This is the Pompidou Center in Paris, which has very flexible kind of architecture, which constantly keeps on changing according to the different kinds of activities it takes on in itself. Other ways to understand temporality in architecture is through studying cultural biographies of objects, where a house forms, degrades, and then becomes like the Suku tribe of Zer. Their houses have a lifespan of 10 years. And as they keep on degrading, they are taken over by different kinds of people. Ultimately, it's eaten up by termites and ants. So these are different ways. And finally, I'll talk about how we represent time in architecture. And this is a project by John Hader, and it's called Tower of Cards, and where he uses this analogy of playing cards. I don't know how many of you know, but it's a very kind of interesting analogy, where he says that the number of cards that in a pack of cards is 52, which equals the number of weeks in a year. And if you add up all the numbers of the cards of the pack of cards, you arrive at a figure of 364. And if you add the joker to it, it becomes 365. So that's the number of days you have in a year. So he places the joker on a wheel, and he erects a tower of cards, and this is his way of representing time in architecture. On the other hand, there is Daniel Libeskind, who works out the whole idea of memory machine from the Middle Ages, pulling out different texts, and this kind of contraption again becomes a way of representing time in architecture. So all these manifestations that we see are primarily they end up into sculptural forms, or they end up they were primarily not designed to be spatially experienced. They were more to stimulate the mind, to calculate or kind of align yourself to the outside movement of the earth. So that's why I want to pull the focus of this presentation to how time bodily affects us in architecture. How if we deal with time in architecture, it can affect us in a more corporeal kind of way. So the most kind of direct way in which time translates in architectural or physical kind of experience is through the idea of circulation. We move in architectural spaces in a real time, and that's how we experience architecture. So one of the most kind of direct or the easiest examples is that of forts, where the entire circulation is designed such that to gain time over the enemy. So it manifests in the form of dungeons, it manifests in the form of increasing the ramp's slope, or increasing the risers of the steps, and so you have control over, or you delay the time taken by the enemy to kind of reach to you. And so it's a very direct kind of translation into materiality. What I will now introduce is this concept of speed, time, and distance in architecture. What I want to kind of argue about is that there is a relationship, a very modernist kind of relationship between speed, time, and distance, and we very in a very traditional way we can see it as speed is equal to distance upon time. So I just wanted to study if we can pull this kind of concept in architecture and study what happens to our built form in architecture. So I'll take 3 examples here and kind of try and relate these 3 and understand what happens when these 3 work together in architecture. The first example I'll give is of Jaisalmer. I'll just introduce you to the 3 examples. One is Jaisalmer, the second is the planning of Chandigarh, and the third is the commercial strip of Las Vegas. In the street of Jaisalmer, we can see that the street, which first of all, it is not designed to take any kind of vehicular traffic. So the speed at which you move in these narrow lanes is very less, and that is why you see a very detailed kind of articulation of the built form in these streets. So while you are walking on the street, you are actually slowed down by the gaze of these built forms, and that also kind of brings a very different kind of manifestation, because it allows you to first of all it becomes very detailed, it is very ornate, and because the speed is slowed in such kind of movement, firstly by virtue of you being a pedestrian, you have time to look at all these intricate kind of things that you are projected upon by. So this is an example of a place where you are moving very slow and the articulation is very dense. I'll move on to the second example of Chandigarh now. The planning of Chandigarh is a very sectoral kind of planning, and if one reads the entire text of how this place was planned, one would know that the size of each sector was 800 meters by 1200 meters, and that was decided upon the fact that ergonomically it is very convenient to kind of traverse from one sector to the other by means of walking. So the whole idea of the planner, Le Corbusier, was that all the conveniences which the people require should be at walking distance from one another. So the module of 800 by 1200 was used, and it ultimately manifests into this whole plan, which can be read in time, which can be read in grid of time. So you can actually say that if you take 10 minutes to traverse a distance of 800 meters, then you will take about 30 minutes to traverse through the entire section of Chandigarh. And what happens is now that Chandigarh also talks about these very strong lanes which were created for the movement of vehicular traffic. So what happens is that the vehicular, there are more people who are using the vehicles, so most of them you will find on two-wheelers traversing through these distances. And so the built form is actually set apart from the road, and it does not really follow the same convention as that of Jaisalmer, but these become very kind of less detailed and block kind of buildings that you see at a distance from the road. So these building blocks just remain as impressionistic blocks in your memory when you pass by these roads. So we see that the whole texture of this place has changed because of the introduction of speed, a different speed as that of different speed as compared to the earlier example, and it becomes very less dense as compared to the earlier one. Finally, I'll go to the example of Las Vegas. This was a study by Robert Venturi, and what he studied was that in the strip of Las Vegas, which is a completely commercial strip, the primary mode of movement is cars, and these cars travel or move at a very high speed. So what has happened is that, number one, there's a lot of space given to parking lots, and that's why the whole analysis begins with the parking lot. And what happens to the built form or built fabric is that it starts becoming bigger and bigger, but it also starts simplifying itself. It starts becoming more and more bland, and what happens is that it almost turns into a billboard. So the building actually becomes a screen, because you are moving at a very fast kind of speed through the road, and you almost kind of have to register it in one go. And so the only way to do it, if you're doing it at a very high speed, is to make your building bigger, simpler, and more direct. So can we go to the next? So this is the kind of analysis which the architect brings forward, that when you're moving at different speeds, you are actually kind of seeing the built form becoming bigger and more bland. And the building almost becomes a symbol, which is completely contrasting to the first example and the second example that we saw. So finally I'll like to conclude this paper, and I'll just read out what I want to conclude and open out to you. That speed emerges as one of the prime characteristics of modern period. The ability to calculate time has enabled us to measure speed. Ideally, we crave for a perpetual increase in speed. The ability of humans to perform a task faster through the aid of machines drastically changes the engagement and experience with their existing surroundings. Introduction of machines and thereby speed in everyday life change the way we see and therefore understand and articulate the physical space around us. The materiality of a space could be understood as a direct resultant of the speed with which it is experienced. Our critiques of built forms are based on our experience of a historical time. Many a times it becomes difficult to accept the change that speed brings in our physical environment. What still remains an open exploration for this paper is whether one can actually use the modern deduction of the relationship between speed, time and architecture, that is, the formula of time is equal to distance upon speed, as a heuristic device to analyze architecture around us. In some ways, the above formula actually manifests in our built environment. But if we were to go further with this understanding, we see tangible ideas to the paradigms of patterned islands of Dubai, which we can probably experience moving in the air at very high speed. But recent innovations in communication technology have indicated contrasting results. In the context of communication technology, space has begun to shrink and our experiences are liberated from time. What do we look forward in such a condition then? If Einstein's theory of relativity was to be believed to come true, and we were actually able to compete with the speed of light, the experience of architecture would become completely anachronistic. Although it seems to be too far-fetched at this point, we have already taken a huge leap. We must be ready to create and experience architecture in the speed we achieve for ourselves. It would allow us to uncover newer physical dimensions beyond the present.
Any questions, or should we go for the questions at the end?
See responses episodically, for each presentation. It will slip out otherwise.
If you are comparing Jaisalmer and if you are studying that the detailing makes the space slow, but if you go to a city like Sitpur in Gujarat, they have vehicular movement in direct city, in all of the city, but the detailing in each of the house is also the same. So why can't but there also, because the detailing is so intense, and if you see each row of house will have a different detailing for each house. So there the speed is also less, even though there is vehicular traffic. And also because the streets of Jaisalmer, as you've shown, are so small, and so the scale of the building is quite huge. So the whole of the view is also not taken in by the pedestrian going from below due to the scale. So how can you compare that?
I have another question.
Yeah.
I mean, to open up your idea of time or actually of speed being something that is a determinant for building language seems to be, to me at least, very simplistic, because then you've chosen examples that can help take forward your argument. But I mean, there's a lot more that goes into building language, or the evolution of building language, than just speed. I mean,
Sure.
I mean, I don't know, it seems to be like you almost open it up as a binary, which I don't know.
Yes, at some level even I thought so, but actually I didn't want to kind of say that this is it. So I just wanted to open it for discussion, and yes, there are many layers to it, but I do feel that speed does regulate in some way the way in which we build, or thing that we build, the materiality of space. To kind of respond to your question, yes, there may be a difference in the detail, but what I'm looking at is that was it intended for that to be appreciated in that kind of speed. because what I am arguing in the case of Jaisalmer is that it wasn't intended to take any vehicular traffic, and so it was kind of it allowed you to engage with the built form in a more kind of intimate way.
No, but my saying was that even if there is a vehicular traffic in Sitpur, people do stop there to gaze at the structure because it is gated.
Okay.
So means it is not just because only there is pedestrian traffic, people stop there.
I would just like to add from your side is that I feel that that's what it is about cities, and that's what is about architecture. There is not one parameter, and then that guides the entire structure or the architecture of a city. It's maybe Sitpur with some other element in priority guided why it had a pedestrian road apart from its culture, what it wanted to display, and its idea of showing detailing was not priority, where Jaisalmer, the construction, the detailing, the workmanship was at its priority. So that guided it to be pedestrianized, whereas it was something else, was a trade in Gujarat that guided it to be connecting to cities. So there are different parameters that guide cities differently, but later obviously history takes over and something becomes like to be loved or looked at and stuff, and that changes. So I thought what was nice is that he brought about an element just as an example to have introduced time as an element to use and show what time can do to cities, and there are various other X parameters that a city can be looked at, the same cities can be looked at for.
Yeah, also because the intricate kind of carvings of Jaisalmer are also always used as a very strong factor of climate conscious building, or they form shadows. But I quite kind of disagree to that, because and that's why the whole new idea of looking at the street as a response in time was kind of opened up.
I think in your entire presentation, I think it might be something which we wanted to show short like the Colosseum which is there. Those kind of examples should be also brought up in your discussion. So I think what he is also trying to say now, that will come through your presentation itself. Those examples are missing. They start coming, like the temples, also Madurai temple, where they are not built for certain kind of stopping and looking, but people admire those things. So
Heritage.
Right.
So they would form a part of those kind of different categories through which would be looked at time.
I wanted to say this. The outlook of architecture, as how you see architecture, one is the visual, and also one very integral one is the experience. Okay, and I feel that, especially you, because you've done cinema for the blind, etc., speed sort of tends to concentrate on what you are looking at, just the visual, whereas time, I feel, in architecture or otherwise, is understood and experienced in change.
Time is change.
You experience time in change. If something is static around you, you're not going to know that time passed. Right? But if there is, the sun rising and the sun setting, and something building and something growing, you experience time. And architecture, to most of us maybe, is a lot about experiencing things. And I wish that maybe instead of looking at such a visual aspect and such a direct, ye fast, ye to flat, this kind of thing, people could have probably just gone on to understand how time is worked out in architecture, because we know that it's experience, not just need to look at, especially after the thesis. So
I think probably it was study for me. But yes, but I would also like to add that what I'm also arguing that when you are moving is also an experience. Probably it is a visual experience. So, but you're talking about a different kind of experience, probably.
No, I'm saying, of course, when you're moving, it is an experience, etc. But like, if you're talking about architecture, using that even when you're sitting in a room and just experiencing the sunlight coming in, you are experiencing time and you're experiencing a certain kind of. It can be a very static thing, but you're still seeing a certain kind of change. But just to say that it's a visual and hence the building is flat or the building is more intricate, I think it's a bit of an oversimplification.
Yeah, I do. I agree to you. It's simplified. But yeah, I probably would still investigate more into it to kind of make it richer. Probably.
Maybe if you're based on the equation that you were talking about, maybe if you explore a little In terms of your distance, when you talk about like even simple, like again an oversimplification in terms of say visual. If you're looking at it visually and you're moving in speed and you see things moving closer, then again the contrary starts happening. If you look at a further distance, again it becomes static. So again you may have a lot of architecture floating around and see the background moving at a certain pace, and it is guided by architecture and speed and how it looks. So maybe that equation may be a starting point for you to like expand a little more on your paper.
Any more comments, questions?
Okay, I'll just introduce you to Amrita. Amrita Sapilkar studied architecture from Kannada Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, and she worked with Majlis on Cinema City, representing the project at Berlinale in February 2010. And currently she is working with SJK Architects. So, yes.
Second year architecture. This project came to us as a competition, and it was seeing a house with the fourth dimension. So we had to choose a fourth dimension to the house. So what I looked at as the fourth dimension, like a multi-dimension house, was time. So how time can mold the space which you live in. So it started with this whole idea that how the experience of space is strongly governed by time because of the amount of time you spend in it. And that's why it automatically, if you start incorporating it into your design, it will make it more uniquely experiencable. And I chose a house as this because a house has different kind of spaces in which a space is for leisure or a space is for work. So each space you tend to spend different amounts of time in it, and that's why it needs a different kind of design for each space. So then I started looking at the fact that there is a way of movement through getting to where you want in your house, and that's when I decided that the walls cannot be built before you build the space. So the walls itself become spaces which you inhabit. So the walls thicken, thin, make a space for you to sit in, or they reduce in height to become a space to sit on, or they become a space which you sleep on. So the walls definitely tend to do these different characters. With that, the roof is no longer a space which just shelters, but it is also a space which you walk on, go into, or it changes your speeds while you're experiencing the house or while you're moving into the house. That's why it becomes more like a ramp sometimes wherein the speed increases. So what you see around you is much more for a longer time as to place inside the house where you want to walk fast and reach somewhere. So all those things started governing how the whole space gets sculpted. So that is when I thought that might be seeing a hilly terrain as a possibility and looking at the walls no longer. So the lighter walls which you see are the ones which come down and you sit on them, you meet people, or the thicker ones are the ones in which you might be there's a space which you need much more intimate, and that's why it needs those walls. And the center space wherein it's more of a congregational living space which happens at the center. And then it went into the roof, wherein the roof automatically talks about going to the center of the house, which is the heart where you meet people, and that is how all these different ramps and sculpture spaces lead you to that center space. And that is when I thought that might be the section of the house is built by these change of heights, change of ramps, and becoming a stool, becoming a gazing space. So as it was on a hill, so you gaze out, that is where it becomes your leisure space. And that is when it went into the third dimension, and this is what happened to it, and it started. So you walk on these roofs and you see what is around you, the context around you. That's why the different heights wherein you want to walk faster or slower. Then it went into this space wherein it's all about the way you perceive the outside, which is the downhill, or you enter when you're entering from top, and that is how the whole third dimension came to it, with time being the fourth. And that's how that whole form came into being. And here it's not that clear, but there's that center space which becomes like a glass space on which is the living space. So when you are up there and looking into the house, the living space is always visible, and the roofs are those ramps which take you into the space. So that's a section, and the blue which you can see, which is not actually very properly visible, is that central living space. These are different views. So that's what was happening, is that when you're gazing out, it's looking out. When you want an intimate space, it goes to become like a nice, the wall really opens up, or it becomes a bed. So these different things just happen on with the same space.
I really felt if you, and this was second year project, so I quite understand, but having it explored now, also the ideas of openings in a building, I feel does a lot more as to the time factor, the speed factor when you talk about it, because it's like, looking, you have a view, you have a beautiful view, but if you have a very small opening that doesn't let you see it, doesn't justify, and then you make them run towards an end which does give you that entire view, then you would speeden up on that ramp, or you would go faster on that. So speaking about context and then openings that make you do that, and also in terms of your form in convex and concave surfaces, it just reminded me of the sculptor Sarah's work, which deals with the convex and concave surfaces and doesn't have a single straight line. And when you move between two convex surfaces or two concave surfaces, how it pushes you out, and then how it elongates the process, because you think you're falling, so you try to concentrate, or something that pulls you in because it's very tight and you want to rush to because you feel claustrophobic because of height. So I felt it was a little more, it was with that, but the exploration was a little less, but obviously it's a second year project. I can't understand from that point of view.
I just wanted to know, you mentioned in the beginning about how the different spaces in the house are kind of used at different times and for different time periods and stuff. How is that kind of translated?
Actually, what happens is that when you look at the space which becomes the bed, and the fact that it needs to be this cozy space which you go into, or versus a space which is looking onto the hillside, which opens up completely. So you're tending to spend that kind of time where you're gazing. So that's why the way it is located and the way what the walls do to the space is what was intended. I think the next project would be we have two students from Rachna Sansar, Pranita and Onkar, and they would like to present this first year project which they have done in college.
We were given two machines, and we have to explore those machines in terms of spaces, in terms of ideas. We just have to understand the mechanisms and then you have to create something which functions, which is apart from these functions, which like a particular machine performs a specific functions, but like, and we have to combine those two machines, and we have to make the machines which performs completely different. In our case, we had a clock and a lock, which in real sense has no relation between, like, we can't say relation, but there is no any link between those two machines. But like one, the old clock, which is quite complex, and the flat lock, which is quite simple machine. We are supposed to make a link between, or we can say link between those two machines, and produce a product which will function completely different. So in our case, we had produced a landscape painting machine. Okay, I have to.
So basically, first we studied both the machines, their workings, the form their levers and all those things work. So first we dismantled both the machines. Like we can see the clock, the needles, we removed it and took the machine out. So what we, like, this was no longer a clock. This was moving in a rhythmic way. It was something like moving in a rhythmic way, and this was. And we had the rhythmic movement over here, and in front of it locks, which was very much static. So what we intended to do is, we wanted this rhythm to be transferred in this lock, and the static and the opening thing that we do using a lock to be used in the machine to generate certain things. So basically, now we were calculating sound in terms of rhythm. So
see this movement, this movement. Because of this, the whole light.
Yeah. We used this circuit using one of the levers, movement of the levers, and the light was getting lit up in the rhythmic way. It's actually here also it has not a big jump
in the rhythm. Like we have dismantle the time in music, in painting, in rhythm, and in visual sense.
That's so. Actually, here also it just got jumped up a bit, so it's not working right now.
It's okay. You did a great job.
Any questions or something?
Just one simple question. Like, when you guys had these two machines with you, what came in your mind that the machine can do these kind of things?
Basically, the first thing, like, we dismantled it, so it was no longer a clock. So now we tried to, it was having a rhythmic movement, the whole lever thing working in a mechanical way. So we thought of different ways that how can this rhythmic way could be converted into, like, we just thought of different things like sound, light, and that's what we use the levers, as in, like, the lever is used for creating this light with this bulb getting lit up, and one of the ways that I told, making the lock, getting the rhythm in this lock, we use this to make a circular movement and making a portrait being painted. That's what we thought of, different things, and we came up with this.
Okay, so these thoughts were there that this kind of thing will do a painting thing also, it will kind of show a visual thing also.
We just went on working with it, and just thoughts came in, and just we just.
When we related time, the thoughts, like, there is no need for thoughts. Thoughts always come, like, what I can relate. I can relate to painting, music, like some kind of. So thoughts gone built up in my mind, in our mind. Because of that, like he did is like first we were just just jumble up in a music kind of thing. We haven't thought of painting. But later on, when we tried to think more, we tried to experience the space inside. Like
rhythm, how can we relate it? So then we went up to painting kind of thing. Painting was not the first thing, but Latin it gone and built up, and then we tried to make a painting machine. It was just a musical machine, but then we like entered into painting machine, like musical painting machine.
First of all, it's really nice manage of machines. And I wanted to know, considering this is a studio in your school, everybody else also had projects as complex as this?
Yeah, everyone, like we were supposed to get a machine, and we were like told to choose a machine which would be suitable for us. Like I had the clock, had the lock, and there was no like relation, but we still chose it looking at simple mechanisms, and then we tried to make up like. There are many other machines, but we went with a relation to time, because it was basically a clock, and then we went according using the time factor model.
Because when we see a clock, we usually think of a time. Like it's not all like we think of a time. When we discuss of time, we think of clock. So I have received this machine, so I have to like go on with that.
And can you give me examples of the other machines that we use by the rest of the staff?
Actually, one second. There is these guys have put up it on their blog, right?
Yeah.
I think I should just tell them.
Actually, all the studio projects are put up on their blog.
And it's a very interesting site. You should check it out.
It's called marringmachines.blogspot.com. So you can have a look at all the projects over there.
Good.
Right.
Good.
Of architecture, lives and works in Mumbai. Currently she is working on Dharavi redevelopment program with KRVIA design cells. She has traveled extensively through Europe and worked at BSR Architects at Bern, Switzerland. She has also worked for Dr. B.B. Doshi in Ahmedabad and the NGO Spark in Mumbai.
I'm going to be presenting my final year architectural thesis. My thesis deals with the idea of time as the fourth dimension of space. So I'll first actually quickly introduce the site and the history of the site. The site is Mandapeshwar Caves in Gujarat. Take you to the history of the site. It was actually a Shiva cave which was dug out in an outcrop in Burmese. In the 1500s, the Portuguese invaded Bombay and they built a church and a monastery on top of the cave. And then in the 1700s, the Marathas destroyed the Portuguese buildings, and the cave was then converted into a chapel by the local Catholic community and was used as a chapel. In the 1950s, another IC church was built on top of the cave at the ruins, and the ASI, that is the Archaeological Survey of India, that was formed, and they kind of restored the cave as a sacred Hindu temple, and they proposed to make like a garden in front of the cave. So just to understand the site, you have the cave over here. In front there's this open ground, and on that side of the road you have a large slum, and behind the slum there's this huge open playground, and behind that is the Dahisa river on this side. Then above the cave you have these old monastery ruins. There's this IC church. You have a very active parish. Then there's a cemetery, and at the back there's a multi-purpose hall. On the left over there is a school building, and that's a playground. And that's a private playground that belongs to the school, and the rest is residential. Okay. Time is only time, and place is always and only place. And what is real only for one time and only for one place.
Ash Wednesday by T.S. Eliot. Every moment is defined by two spaces, by two coordinates on space and time graph. When one of them is changed, the moment completely alters. So I've looked at the individual defining moments in the history of the site, and at every moment I've changed a key aspect and then imagined how the site would have then kind of developed. So I've made I'm presenting 5 of these constructed fictional histories of the site. And what I've then done is I've overlapped all these histories, and by the process of overlapping, I've then derived on certain programs and architectural elements and spaces that have then helped me kind of make a design proposal. So I begin with the constructed fictional histories of site. Portuguese Mount Poiçar Valley, condition if the cave never existed. The Portuguese built a magnificent church near the Dahisa river. Soon a community like Kotachi Wadi on the island city sprung up here. The church in front of the the square in front of the church is used for various community programs, morning markets, fun fairs, etc. Facing the square are the BMC and the post offices. The ASI has renovated and converted the old monastery ruins abutting the church into a museum and set up a small office and a control tower to protect the heritage precinct. The Hindu pilgrimage. Condition if the Portuguese never came. The Mandapeshwar caves expanded and more cells like in the Buddhist multi-level viharas were created for the resident monks. With its growing significance in Hindu worship, the local community built a shrine to a mother goddess. A sanitarium and a multi-purpose hall for marriages, medical camps, etc. have now come up, enriching the community life. The cave, the church, the tank and the market. Condition if the two faiths coexisted and co-expanded. The Portuguese church on top of the caves hurt the Hindu sentiment. Hence they built a temple on top of the cave and a sacred tank in front to harvest rainwater for the daily chores of the monks. The small orchards and agricultural farms across the road are now available to channelize this water. The deserted cells of the caves are used by the women of the community to run small-scale cottage industries, hold tuition classes, and also for community and political meetings. The two plazas. Condition if the ASI and the church worked in partnership. The bizarre Supreme Court verdict had made the cave ground and monastery ruins as ASI property and the space between the ruined walls as church property. So the ASI has constructed a lightweight roof over the ruins, and the church now holds vocational training for the slum community there. The arcaded, now public, cave ground holds markets to sell products during this training. To promote tourism, the ASI has constructed a museum observatory and an amphitheatre here. The church ground is retained as private space, dissected by a corridor for access to the playground behind the slum. Another archway connects the precinct to the IC church market behind. The state and the public corridor. Condition if the state intervened. The BMC has proposed to create a public corridor starting from IC Colony Market through the church and the ASI properties, cutting across Shivaji Nagar to open into the 11-acre Maidan between the Dahisa river and the slum. The church will be compensated with an additional FSI in situ. The part of the corridor that cuts through the slum will accommodate amenities like balwadis, clinics, etc. for the slum community. The palimpsest. Condition if the fictional histories were overlapped. The various parallel constructed stories of the site are then overlapped. The three main actors and programs that emerge from this are the ASI, the church and the community. And from this overlap, I've then sifted out certain programs that I think are relevant today, like the ASI Museum Observatory, The monastery has become as a vocational training area for women and children, cave annex as multi-purpose spaces for community, the arcade, and other such programs which have then helped me with my architectural intervention.
Personally, I think it's a lovely work, and I really like your drawings because I'm seeing the project for the first time.
What made you decide on the programs which were for a particular condition? Like if we take an example of the Portuguese condition, how did you decide on that? This would be the things which will happen?
It was a fictional narrative. It was actually, a lot of it also came from simultaneous events that happened in the city at that time. For example, if you go to the first image, that is the Portuguese church. So at that time, areas like Kotachigadi and Mathalpagadi were also these extremely Portuguese, places that were inhabited by the Portuguese and very like Catholic areas. And I looked at how things happened there, and so that kind of informed my imagination of the site at that time. And just like a lot of like reading of history and things like that. Should we move to the next one? Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture and Environmental Studies, interested in putting the inherent confusion of an architect to good use by not following any predefined notions of what architecture practice involves, avoiding jumping into the master's broad bandwagon and unintentionally disregarding how job profile in constant flux seems. Being part of the Dharavi redevelopment project at the KRVI Design Cell, while teaching as visiting faculty at KRVI, worked as senior key client executive and writer at Indian Architect and Builder magazines, and currently practicing as an architect in the city.
For any abstract notion of time, this is sort of a very personal chronicle of my own house, and I don't know if you all will be able to identify with it. My house is in the suburbs, and what I pieced together from what my parents and my grandparents told me about my house, because it was almost a decade before I was born. So there were a lot of things that happened then. And before I sort of understood or inhabited that space, my parents were telling me about how it was a larger space initially, and how what we purchased was a part of it. This initially, when my parents were about to purchase the house, this is what they were shown. You shown the layout, and there was the living room with this balcony space, kitchen, bedroom, this very healthy sort of passage which my father loves, and we couldn't afford it at that point. And my father was the only earning member, and he tried to work it out with the builder, and it so happened that we were allowed to take only a part of it, and one portion of it, which was the living room, was given away to the Typing Institute. So that sort of meant that I had this new house, which didn't have a living room, which had a bedroom, kitchen, passage, and which we had to sort of rework, because the entry to my house would have been through that space, and now suddenly we had to think about how we would enter it, how we would inhabit it, how we would use it. So in that sense, my house is sort of a stuck. Initially it was part of a whole, and then what I was given was this thing that I could then move around and shuffle and make it my own. I sort of look at my own house then sort of as a machine, and a lot of houses in the city go through this process where you're given a balcony space and naturally then you incorporate it within your house, you enclose it, and you sort of use it for a different purpose there. So we reworked it, and the bedroom space and the balcony sort of fused into the living room. And what happened was, obviously, we were in a joint family, and my grandparents, we needed another room. So then the kitchen was sort of shuffled into that passage, and that became our bedroom. And I don't remember many things about my childhood, but I remember that every time my grandfather argued with my grandmother, he would, there was this cot in the passage and he would sort of stay there. I think then the other big event that happened, which happened to most of us, was the floods. And my house is at the ground floor. And most of our belongings, furniture, even the walls, they sort of got really destroyed because of the floods. And at that point, up till then, my mother was sort of very happy with our flat. It was on the ground floor. It was near the market. It had all the plus points that she would want. But suddenly when water flooded our house, she wanted to really move up. And she didn't want to be anywhere close to the ground. And obviously we can't really move my house up a couple of floors. But I sort of started imagining, what if we could? If, as architects, when you're designing the spaces for someone else, you don't automatically presume sort of basic necessities that you're giving them, but instead you give them a sort of flexible shell, okay, which imagines potential futures for that space. And as people inhabit it, they're able to change it, and then it's no longer sort of this rigid form that they have to use in a certain way, or only that maybe they can just enclose the balcony, or only do these certain kind of functions on it, and they can do more than that. So if we imagine the city then as sort of this pollination of this process, and that every house goes through a process similar but very personal, depending on the desires, the potentials of each person and what they're capable of at that time. It would mean this fabric of a city where, which is very sort of rich and which keeps changing, because every time I'm able to do something else and maybe afford something new or make a different addition as my family extends, contracts, and sort of just keeps getting together. Shivani Sede is an undergraduate from Kambaraj Vidyarthi Institute for Architecture. Her final year thesis is based on reinventing program in transient and marginal spaces in the city. She has worked for several exhibitions and publications, including Makeshift Mumbai 2007 and Housing and Home 2009. She has taken part in studios for Paramount Architects School Norway, respectively. She is currently working as an intern for mobile offices. Apart from interning, Shivani illustrates for children's books.
Which one? This was my thesis topic, talking about marginal and transient spaces in the city. So, I initially started off with categorizing the city into buildings and dialogue, streets and melodies, burial spaces in sickness and care, open spaces and phenomenon, and structure and imagination. And this sort of set up a process of documenting the city and going to spaces and just taking photographs of the space. So I'll take you through a couple of photographs that I have taken of these spaces. So, from all the photographs that I did take and from whatever I understood of the city, I realized it as a machine that constantly evolves and in the process of evolution creates new spaces and leaves over and has leftover spaces which then tend to display some sort of ambiguity in not only terms of program but in terms of the space itself. But you're not completely sure what the space is. And so I sort of categorize that into areas of operation, space, everyday and everyday. And along with that categorization for the public and private space in the city, I recategorize that into the industry, institution and the house. So if we have the city as a machine, which is basically a form of technology, then we would have these stagnations which are the industry, institution and the house, which become the industrial wasteland, the urban artifact and the cemetery house. So my entire image of the city was based on the sort of decay and deterioration that takes place within the city because of time, and become spaces that are either in the overgrowths of something that has been being developed around it, or which has been pushed to the periphery because nobody really wants to look at the space anymore, and not because it's maybe because it's not used or because it's dirty or it's not, people are not aware of it anymore. So those kind of spaces, the transitory and peripheral spaces are my main areas of interest. Because of that, I started conceptualizing what I envisioned my building to be. Now, since these spaces are alienated to the city and thereby to the inhabitants of the city, I imagine these spaces to be alienated spaces of the city. That means they are twice alienated. You are alienated from them and they are alienated from the city. So what kind of a program could be housed in such a space? So I started looking at leisure programs, but not leisure as a form of entertainment, but leisure as a form of rest or sleep. So my main program was sleep, and I derived a lot of the idea of sleep from nature and what it meant to have a halfway home. So I looked at elements of or animals in nature, like the snail, the weaver bird, the snake and the spider, that created their own halfway homes and used that sort of a language to inform my final design. The site that I chose was Sandhurst Road Station because of the railway sheds. They're unused. Some of them are used as grain sheds, but the others are completely unused. So my intervention was to retain the space as it was and not to push for redevelopment, but to create an intervention within the existing fabric of the space, not by over-programming, but by creating programs that could be used by anybody actually who visited the site. So the main programs were the temporary shelter, the halfway home, the archive, which was to house records of the city and personal memorabilia or census records, and a ramp that connected the station to
the road on the other side. So those are a couple of views of what the space would feel like.
I didn't see any images of that. Because the way you were saying about alienated spaces, I think that's the most alienated space which I think none of us experienced that space like that. The way it is, the way the people work there, the way the people are there from morning to evening and they don't have any association with the life which is happening beyond that Dharukana. I think that also should be got into your thesis more. So those kind of programs also you can start plugging those programs.
Actually, one of the sites that I visited, I took a lot of photographs, so I couldn't obviously put them on the slide, but Dharukana was definitely one of the places.
Alright, thank you everybody. So,